Hey guys, and welcome back to Time Under Tension. I am here with Dee Davis, and today we are continuing our newest series on relationships, which was honestly such a blast to start and really initiated some great discussions between us. And I'm really excited for kind of diving back into it today with a little bit more detail.
Yeah, I'm excited too.
So, would you like to introduce the topic of conversation today?
Sure, I can introduce it. Um, as we were talking about where we wanted to go with this, communication has just been the central point of not only our current journey, but everything that we discussed in the first episode around how we were able to unlock some of those patterns of behavior and how we were able to start to cultivate a healthy relationship in this connection. And I think really diving into communication from a couple of different avenues, definitely addressing, we had someone comment, and maybe bringing up that comment and just starting there might be a good way to get into it. But really just how significant the communication process is and how it adapts or how you have to adapt to what you set in stone at a certain time, how that can change, and how that part of the communication really is going to elevate the current level of connection you have with your partner or ability to get what you need, as well as love your partner for what it is that they need.
Absolutely. And I think communication's challenging because it's rooted in patterns like almost everything else. And I think a lot of times there's some roots in the patterns that we saw in childhood, whether that was our parents or other caretakers or siblings, being around people who communicate in certain ways and use certain styles of communication in order to try to either connect with a person or to get what they want from a person. We start to kind of pick up on those throughout our lives. And so sometimes it can be really difficult to like separate ourselves from our communication style and recognize that we can change and we can alter the way that we're connecting with someone when those patterns are no longer serving us.
Yeah, honestly, I think that's a pretty good place to start because if I think about early on in our relationship, one of the big things that we had to work through was you communicating to me from an educational standpoint or wanting to explain something in depth was making me feel a little bit like an experience I had when I was young, and vice versa. My tone, the way I was coming off and explaining something was more of my passion, but to you, it was feeling a lot like something you experienced in your childhood. And so it was like, not only was the tone or the way in which we were communicating kind of triggering a past experience we had had that wasn't helping us align on the same page, but also our language, the words we were choosing to use didn't share the same definition. So it was like that process of having to understand when I say this particular thing, this is what I mean by that. Whereas the same word to you or the same phrase could mean something completely different.
Yes, like defining terms, but also outside of words, I think body language is a big one. Because we've talked about that before. Like you've told me that like my body language reminds you of someone else, or like my body language doesn't like align with what I'm saying, and that can feel like very confusing. And I feel the same, like when there's times when I perceive that you're being like aggressive or that you're angry, I'm like making assumptions about the body language that I'm seeing based on body language I've seen from people in my past. And I don't think it's not that it's unfair. It's just, I think when especially when we've been in a relationship for, months, years, we have to really drop those assumptions and move away from assuming we know what it means to maybe a more broad, I know that this isn't your normal, and here's what I'm seeing. Like I see, you'll tell me, I see you're moving really fast. And then that allows me to kind of come back into myself and say, "Oh, I'm moving really fast right now." That's usually a sign that I'm kind of operating out of my head and that I'm anxious. So it's become less of a like getting triggered by each other's body language to like being able to help mirror each other's body language to indicate when we're not at our normal because we know each other well enough, but we're not. running into that issue as often where we know each other so well that we start assuming we know what the other person's mannerisms mean.
Right. Because something that we really emphasize with each other that I think is could be super helpful for everyone else is like we're constantly changing as individuals and we learn new things every day, especially when you're willing to do the personal work that comes with growing in your communication in your relationship with your romantic partner or someone you love and care about. A lot is going to change internally in the way that you're not only looking or perceiving a situation, but how much you're interoceptive awareness is really coming online. That if I were to assume that you are the same person you were yesterday, even, then all of a sudden I'm limiting you in your ability to grow or to show up differently, or I'm holding on to something you said in the first couple months we were together. Now, almost 2 years later, I'm still holding on to that same thing as if it still stands true with you. And that was uncovering the fact that we are evolving as individuals and allowing for that room for change keeps that communication so constant that it doesn't allow for there to be this period of time where all of a sudden then this small thing happens and it causes this bigger like argument, for example. It's like, no, throughout each day, I know this is an opportunity where we're going to learn about each other again. And that means I have to over communicate again. Or I guess right now we're over communicating, but communicate with you to let you know what I'm seeing for you to then tell me what it means instead of me making an assumption based on something you had said in the past.
That's a great point. And I think just to clarify, like holding on to things from the past, I think there's a difference between holding someone to their promises and their commitments versus like understanding what parts of a person are more like subject to change and you want to give them the room to do that. And like an example, I think for us was like, I mean, for instance, I like my space, and there were times when I felt like you held on to that idea so much that you would give me tons of space, and it felt like you were, like, pushing away from me. But in your
Hmm.
mind, you were, like, kind of doing what you thought I had asked, or I had asked, but in, like, kind of a previous season. But then as
Hmm.
our relationship evolved, I found, like, I don't really want as much space from you, and I wanna have more conversations, and I'd like more physical touch, whereas before I wasn't as open to that. So it was cool to have that discussion again because I think we've done that several times where we've kinda had to stop and be like, "Hey, I'm actually acting out of a conversation that we had months ago, and that's
Right.
why I'm doing this, and now it's not working." But I love that because it gives us an opportunity to kind of to grow and shift and then to communicate what we need in the now.
Yeah, and I want to make a little clarification as well because what I think is so important about all of this is that there is that willingness to ask your own self why you're feeling a particular way about something that's happening. Because if you're reactionary in your response and just identifying fully with your feeling, then there's never going to be that next step of understanding what it was that triggered you. So even when we talked about my tone comes off as aggressive to you, or for you, the way that you describe things to me or are educating me on something. If I were to just be like so annoyed and triggered and pissed off about the situation, instead of realizing, like thinking like, okay, well, why am I feeling this towards you right now? And the other part of that is always assuming that your partner has the best intention. Like that needs to be the central focal point of all communication is I'm going to assume the only assumption I'm gonna make is that I'm assuming that you have the best intentions. And so whatever is happening right now is not you trying to hurt me or to put me down or to make me feel small or powerless in the situation. It's like I'm gonna assume good intentions. Okay, so now I'm gonna ask myself why is it that I am feeling this way and really do that self work like I talked about before. But question asking not only to your partner, but also to yourself, to me, is a very, very easy, like simple way to begin to learn about self and begin to grow in your relationship with your partner. Because if I ask why, okay, now I understand, well, when I'm growing up, I'm getting lectured to a lot and unable to have any sort of response, or that my opinion or thoughts are irrelevant considering the situation. And so when I ask myself why and I realize that, then all of a sudden I see you for who you are and your good intention, and I'm able to tell you what it is that I need in that situation.
Definitely, and I think being able to assume that your partner has the best of intentions requires this baseline of communication where you're aligning on what it is that you want. And like we talked about
Mm,
last week with the beach ball, having the beach ball, the problem, seeing it as something between you two that you're working as a team to address versus seeing your partner as the problem. That requires like, I think check-ins with each other and kind of saying like, okay, how are things going? Do we feel loved this week? How did you show up for me? Like kind of having that kind of discussion. We talked about that and did that for a while where it was like, um, here's how you showed up for me this week, and here's how you made me feel really loved, and like here are the, I don't know, moments I really enjoyed with you, and here's maybe what I need more of. And having that discussion be kind of ongoing, like once a week, in order to make sure that you're realigning because you will change over time. But it's also important, I think, to have that discussion frequently because it starts to, for me, I tend to be pretty defensive. So for me, having that discussion starts to move it out of, oh, I'm doing something wrong, to like, okay, awesome. How can we continue to love each other better, just more and more over time? And knowing that we're both working on it and we both have that open space to ask for what we need in like a safe setting where it's not like in the middle of an argument, like you never touch me when you come home, blah, 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 whatever it is. It's like not in a heated discussion, but like in a separate conversation that's specifically designated for that. And of course, when there's times that come up through the week that's like, oh, I really feel like I'm needing more conversations, more one-on-one time or quality time, then you need to have that discussion as soon as you recognize that so that that resentment doesn't build up. But
mm.
I think having those like consistent scheduled check-ins once a week is super helpful for starting to establish that baseline of communication and make sure that you're actually aligned on what you want from your relationship. Because if you guys have different expectations for what quality time looks like, one person
Right.
could be totally satisfied and one person could feel like they're not getting the time that they need. And there's like this mismatch of expectations and dissatisfaction is going to start brewing. And then by the time one person says like, "Hey, I'm not getting what I need," the other person's like, "Well, I didn't know at all." And then that just starts a discussion and again kind of puts the problem in your partner. Whereas if you had kind of initiated conversations around, "Hey, this is what I would expect from quality time," and then the other person presents their expectations, and then you guys learn how to meet in the middle, and then you have those weekly check-ins where you're like, "Okay, did that meet our expectations? Okay, you feel like we need a little bit more," whatever, and finding that balance and knowing that it's gonna shift over time as well.
Yeah, I love your point about defensiveness because I think everybody experiences that. And I think about the specific conversation we had when we were walking the other night, and what I kind of want to bring up in this, it ties all of that together, is like the resentment piece that you mentioned about not using your voice until you're absolutely about to explode. Like that in itself is going to cause that beach ball to be in your partner without your partner even knowing that there's something, in them, the beach ball, right? So this conversation that we had, the defensiveness piece, because I'm also a very defensive individual and naturally, but something about that specifically is not accepting that that's how you have to be. And I'm going to talk a lot about empowering yourself to change in relationships throughout all of this because for years I was this reactive, defensive, my feelings, my emotions, what I think is right and needs to be heard because it's what I'm experiencing. But what we discussed and what we realized, and this is where I think there is this balance between defensiveness and truly hearing your partner for where they're at and also saying, I hear you, but this was also my point of view of the situation. So how can we then, knowing both of our feelings are valid, the reality of the defensiveness is that both of us want our feelings to be valid. We want ourselves, we want to be validated for what we're experiencing, and both are true. So that's just understanding that two people are never going to have the same experience. And in that defensiveness, where you can show up to be a better partner is by removing your defense, by being vulnerable and opening your heart up to the situation, knowing that your partner's experience is equally as valid as your own, and listening to what they're saying actively. That means not responding, not thinking about what you're saying, just like you mentioned on our last call, and being able to receive what it is that your partner just experienced in a situation, and then saying, like, using language like, I hear you. What is it that you need from me in this situation? How can I show up better? That then forces the partner to think more deeply about what it is that they need in the situation, but also following you then can say, this was my experience. I had these feelings, and this is what I felt like I needed from you in the situation. So having that capacity to understand that your defensiveness is truly just a part of you that's like wants to be heard and seen and validated in the moment. But again, just like you said with that beach ball, the beach ball needs to be over to the side. It's not that your partner is trying to come at you. Well, I guess we should always understand the good intention piece and building that foundation. But when you're expressing your emotion to your partner, asking your partner to be open to receive that, personally letting your guard down, and then being able to share your experience, then coming together and figuring out what both of you two needed in the situation is going to help work through a lot of that anger or that really heightened tone or that really explosive kind of arguing back and forth where everything is just getting escalated because neither person is listening and has this huge wall up um with their partner. So I kind of just wanted to like put that out there just because I feel like defensiveness is a very like normal and common thing. Doesn't need to be something you accept though, and doesn't need to be something that dissipates something that's really good and growing and fruitful in a relationship.
Definitely. Do you mind if I share about our card game?
Oh God. Yeah, go ahead,
I
go ahead, go
I
ahead.
think it's a cool example of this
Yeah,
and just
yeah,
how we had very different perspectives and how we really like met each other in the middle with it, I feel.
yeah.
So we are
I
both
am a
very
very competitive person, okay?
we're both very competitive. You a little bit more so at when it comes to like your expressions around winning. Which to be fair, I know you've worked a lot on, but we've been playing card games a lot, and there is one, what's it called?
Jen.
Gin, that I was winning at, like, literally every time. I mean, probably, like, 30 games in a row. It was
This
crazy.
was not part of the story that you needed to mention, by the
Right.
way, your
It
winning
was
streak.
because it really contributed to the buildup, and my streak
Okay.
is broken, so let me celebrate. Um, so we were playing one night, and you had gotten, like, frustrated about my, like, winning streak, and the thing is I am competitive, but I also am, like, really empathetic, and I feel really bad if I'm, like, inconveniencing someone or, like, upsetting someone, and when you expressed a little bit of frustration around the outcome of the game, I started to shut down because when I experience, like, conflict or anger, it's like I'm not fight, not flight, I'm freeze. I just, like, shut down, and because I find that it's, like, the most neutral attitude that I can take to hopefully prevent escalation, and that's pattern from my childhood. So we have that communication pattern that comes up in our relationship every so often, and we've learned that it doesn't really work well because you start getting like upset and then you get more vocal and then I like totally withdraw and then I'm not engaging you and then you don't feel heard and then you feel bad and it's just like this pattern. So we're playing this game and you had just lost the previous round and I was already like kind of shutting down because you were not super thrilled. And then that wasn't helping because I wasn't really engaging you. And then I won again and I said, I'm sorry after I won. And that was very upsetting to you. And
Yeah.
it was started this discussion. And in my mind, I was like, well, I am sorry because I really don't want to upset you. And honestly, I wish you would have just won. So this, you could, I don't know, not be upset about losing because I don't care that much about winning. But, and then I thought you were upset because you lost again. But as we kind of talked it out, it became clear that like you felt that I could be judging you. So then me saying I'm sorry felt like pity, which
Hmm.
wasn't at all like what I perceived at all. I was trying to be like as neutral as and passive in a way as possible to prevent that what I perceived as conflict. But what you really needed was like actually we kind of established if I was just kind of pushing back a little bit and playing around with you and making it more lighthearted. So after we had that discussion, once I understood, oh, you didn't want to feel like I pitied you, then I realized why me saying sorry was like very out of place. And the next night we played again and it was like nothing had happened. And as soon as we like even started talking about playing, I kind of joked around about beating you again. And there was just this moment of like understanding where I felt like you you felt it seemed like you felt heard,
Hmm.
that I was, like, willing to kinda banter with you about it instead of,
Right.
like, freeze up and then express what came across as, like, pity. So, it was so cool because even in a small situation like that, to me, that's a much larger pattern in our communication styles that, I say more than any other, like, conflict we have, I think that's one of our biggest ones, is if you start getting a little bit, like, I don't even wanna say heated, but louder, more vocal, frustrated, whatever it is, I tend to shut down and then it just starts this like cascade of events. So having this conversation was really helpful because I feel like it showed me what you needed and what you wanted and how you felt instead of just being identified completely with the emotions that we felt in that situation and like what I was assuming you were feeling.
Yeah. And I think what I can add to that is a perfect example of me uncovering a deeper rooted early childhood pattern that I didn't even know I still had, because this has been a problem in my relationships before. It's been a problem in all my relationships. You can ask my siblings. I mean, sometimes they're like, yo, just expect it if you lose. We already know D's gonna be, shitty or whatever. But like, since I've gone through the process of seeing truly what that reaction was doing to my relationships, I had gotten out of that, but I didn't realize just how much performance was something I was still holding on to as this way in which I would perceive myself as good, or like, willing to be respected or could be loved or anything like that, for example. So like in that whole example, you expressing I'm sorry felt like pity because I felt like I wasn't good enough through the fact that my performance was like truly lacking in this card game. I won't even lie about it. It was truly lacking. But um that is a perfect example of then me working through that with you and talking through it helped me uncover something that now I know, now I know about that about myself and can really start to work on that in my own personal life. And I think what I really want to talk about that girl's comment because I think that kind of plays into this a little bit. I know it's kind of a roundabout way, but we're discussing, especially struggles with mental health and with your partner, or maybe do you want to read the comment real quick or at least address the question really fast?
Yeah, so she mentioned that she feels like I'm similar to her partner, and last week I mentioned that I tend to be the type to kind of withdraw, um, and she said that sometimes she'll bid for connection, so she'll, like, reach out to him, and he doesn't necessarily, like, respond to that, like, reach back out to her, and I mentioned last week that don't let that stop you from bidding for connection because if you keep showing up, a lot of times, as long as you guys are on the same page as to what you want or have the best intentions, even if you're a little bit more proactive, sometimes your bidding for connection can start to show that person, hey, I'm going to keep pulling for you. I'm going to keep asking you to love me and I'm going to keep showing you love. And then they start meeting you in the middle with that. So that was part of it. But she said that she struggles sometimes to cope when it feels one-sided when her partner is struggling with mental health, and I think that's a great point because as we've learned in our relationship, it seems like it goes in waves for us where one of us will be going through a really challenging season and the other might not be struggling as much, and then
Yeah,
it'll
yeah.
it'll swap back and forth, and it can be super challenging during that time because you feel like you're, like, pouring so much more into the other person. And even though you're bidding for connection, they're not necessarily able to give you that same effort back.
Yeah, and that's where I wanted to go with this is because you just talked about how I'm a little over expressive. Like externally process and I'm very vocal about what I'm feeling and what's going on in my mind and things like that. Whereas you've spoken about how you're much more freeze and you're much more internal processing and you shut down. And so your way of processing or feeling a type of way is to totally just go in. And and that I wanted to talk about that comment because I feel like that is something on my end that I've had to work through a little bit and that you've had to meet me where I'm at too, both ways. It works both ways, but you needed to let me know that you don't process the same way. Like you're not actively, outwardly sharing how you're feeling, what it is you're thinking. So I'm left not knowing and you're quiet and kind of distant in a way, right? Like earlier on would be a little bit more um just kind of willing to put it to the side and process it later on your own, trying to meet me where I'm at in this discussion we're having. Whereas what I hear in her comment is like she's feeling like, she's bidding for connection and he's really internally processing. And what I had to learn is that me continuing to ask you what's wrong or me continuing to bid for connection, you were willing to meet me there. Like you were willing to come and discuss things, but I had to learn what it was that you needed. And so my advice to her would be like, ask him to think about how he needs you to show up for him or how you can love him. And so the way in which that might be is honestly giving him space to process and giving him some time to process, especially if it's a season of struggle. Sometimes you're just in that fight or flight or you're in that freeze and you just can't rationally think. And that's a time where that individual, having self-regulation tools or being able to tap into some sort of groundedness practice can call upon that rational thinking again that can lead to him being able to express to her what it is that she needs from him. And thinking about how your partner processes or what they need is really important. So once you vocalize to me, I just don't process like that. Like I'm very much in my emotions at the time, so I'm like thinking through them before I'm ever saying anything to you. Like you want to have everything kind of processed before we talk about it. And you actually, and I'll let you speak to this because it's totally your journey, but you've actually been much more open to externally processing with me in the moment a little bit more. And that's been I know that's been something you've worked really hard to do because it's out of your comfort zone, but that has allowed me to have more of those bits and pieces of connection to really be there for you and to know where you are in a particular season because I can understand her point of it being really hard when you're consistently bidding for connection. You can kind of tell that it's not like being met with the same level of like intentionality, not because it's on purpose, but just because you know that person's struggling with something. And so, my advice to her would also be like, ask if it was something that you did, if there's anything that you can do, like really try to figure out if there are things that your partner needs, and be very open to what it is, even if it's different than what you would need or how you would process something.
And then I think making sure that that is a discussion. So starting with that, like, hey, tell me how I can show you love. How do you feel love the most, you know? And that has been a big discussion we can talk a little bit about as well. But making sure that you know how he feels love so that you can show him in tangible ways. And then also asking like, okay, say he does need space. Maybe he's more like me and needs like, I like to process first because I don't like to act out of my immediate emotions. I'm working on that. It's getting a little bit better in terms of real time processing, but I do better when I'm out of the situation and can really think about like what my values are and what's most important to me in this discussion before I come back to it. But if you are the kind of person who like you get anxious when that discussion's not happening and you like spiral because you don't really know what he's thinking and you don't really know when you're going to talk about it or if you're going to talk about it, I think it's important to also maybe offer what you need to meet him in the middle. So, for instance, saying like, absolutely take your time to process. Can we talk about this tonight? Or like, you know, within 24 hours, can we have a conversation about this? Like setting a timeline that's going to be helpful for both of you so you can meet each other in the middle. And so if you are an external processor, you're not feeling like you're having to like nervously wait around and wonder like, are we ever going to talk about this? Or, when is going to be a good time? Maybe having more of a like, hey, let's go and do the rest of our day. We both have some stuff left to do. And then maybe at 5 when we're like done with our work and stuff, we can have a conversation about it if that gives you enough time to process. So I think that's helpful as well. Um, in regards to being struggling with mental health, I think it's super important to listen to your partner. If you're the one struggling with mental health and your partner's like trying and you're just like, you don't have the energy, you just really feel exhausted every time they ask you to do something, like it just feels like they're being really needy, whatever it is, stop and remember what your priority is for this relationship and know like it's going to take that effort, but you also should update them on where you're at. So it's like if I'm, in a season where I'm struggling with depression, it's like I need to let my partner know that and say like, "Hey, I'm struggling. I'm really down right now. I don't have a lot of energy and I just want you to know that it's nothing about us and it's something I'm really working on and I'm not really sure what I need right now, but I'll let you know about ways you can support me and I'm going to do my best to like be there and be engaged in this relationship and I just want you to help be a mirror for me and like keep me accountable for making sure that I'm showing you love as much as I can right now." So I think having that discussion as well is helpful so that you're honoring what you need. Like if you need that space, to kind of deal with whatever it is that's going on, let your partner know what's going on because they can also be a really great resource for you. I struggle with anxiety a lot and it's gotten so much better. I really don't think about it daily, which is a win I want to celebrate. But, I think a huge part of it is you telling me like, "Hey, are you okay? You just seem a little fast, or you seem a little off, or you seem like you're in your head." And it doesn't feel like an accusation, like I want to push you off, or I want to like I'm just frustrated because I'm like, well, I'm doing everything I need to do. Like, why are you coming at me? Like, it's not like that. I know that the intention is just to tell me like, hey, are you good? Because I know you better than anyone, and I see you more than anyone, and I know when you're not at your best. And sometimes you'll tell me when you see signs before I'm even really aware that I'm stuck in that pattern.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think you made so many excellent points during that response, and the harder truth I think about all of this is, like, you gotta own up to where you have some things to work on. Like, in a relationship, you have to own up to your insecurities. Like, you can't just accept those things, you know? Like, I guess you can, but that's gonna lead to a very unfulfilled relationship and an unfulfilled life, you know? Like, I had a ton of insecurities that I needed to work through, and it's really hard. It's really hard. Relationships are not this, like, la la la, daisies and roses and whatever all the time, like, especially when you're doing willing to do the hard work, and, we're at this place now where we've consistently I mean, it's like we talk every day about something, every night, I mean, it's just constant, and so now, almost 2 years in, like, we're starting to experience those really long spurts of continuous joy and understanding and these amazing periods of time that is so worth the hard work, but the truth is, in relationship, you're gonna be exposed, like, the parts of you that are imperfect that have held on to as survival patterns or just, "That's just how I am," kinda statement gets exposed, and if you're wanting to really build not only a healthy relationship with yourself and get better as a person and be able to create this entirely more colorful and fruitful life by working through those things, like leveling up your frequency, you have to be willing to address your imperfection and be willing to work on it because, you know, for so long I didn't do that in relationships and I was like, well, I guess I'm probably just never going to find this right person for me. Like I'm not good at them or whatever the conclusion is that you come to or um consistent pattern you're seeing in the relationship that you're in. Usually, if there's a consistent pattern, there's like one thing that has been consistent throughout the whole thing, and that is yourself. And so, in that realization, that hard truth to me is like, understand that your partner is going to be very reflective of you like a mirror, and it's an opportunity to grow in love with that person and to grow in love with yourself going through those hard things. So being able to take feedback and also understand that you're not always right or you're not going to be perfect in the relationship all the time. Being willing to work through not only your partner's insecurities and your partner's patterns, but your own, that in itself to me is where a lot of our deep-rooted foundation in this relationship and the way that we've been able to grow is all consumed in, is being willing to do the hard work of the personal exploration journey that comes with this, which is, like, totally looking in the mirror and being able to not condemn yourself, understand that you have the power to make change in that place and be able to be this new and renewed individual that's gonna show up the next day or in the next moment as you want your best self to show up as.
I think growth is one of the greatest gifts that we have, and I think it's our probably one of our greatest responsibilities, and if we want to grow, we need to constantly be addressing those areas of weakness because those are our weakest points, and they're our
Right.
greatest opportunities for growth, and I use that with clients a lot, like, what are our opportunities for growth? Not like, where did you fall short, but, like, look at that as, awesome, this is an area that I can leverage to grow. Your relationships are hard. It's probably easier to not be in one, and if you wanna just look out for number 1, probably don't be in a relationship, and you can do that, and you may have, like, an awesome life like that, that's great. But if you wanna be in a relationship, it is a really awesome opportunity for self-development. Like, if you want self-development, be in a committed relationship and commit to addressing your weak points every single day. It's vulnerable and it hurts at first, but as you move through it, you start to realize, like, I didn't need those things. If I'm holding
Mhm.
on to my weaknesses, I'm holding myself in place. Like I'm holding on to the chains that are keeping me locked into this way of being that is only perpetuating patterns that aren't really working for me. Whereas if I see my partner as like, in a way, a mentor, like, they're teaching me a lot about myself, about life, about having a different perspective. And then I'm doing the same for them. You guys can grow at a crazy rapid rate. It takes building that foundation of trust and again, laying down those intentions for, hey, we're both in this to make this work and to be our best selves. But I think it's kind of cool to think about it like, if you want to grow, if you want to have an awesome life, start like showing up for your partner and see how much you grow. It's really amazing because I think that's how we start to work on our weak points. We learned a lot of these patterns in relationship when we were young. So we need to establish probably better patterns, more effective patterns in relationships as adults. And if we're unwilling to be vulnerable and get close and admit where we're expressing behaviors or thought patterns that aren't working, we're going to just continue to perpetuate the patterns that have been with us throughout our lives.
Yeah, that's great. I think what we can talk about next time is boundary setting in that in this kind of way as well, because my mind's going now to yes, this is, but there are some boundaries to set with your romantic partner and with all relationships, there are boundaries to set, especially when you're doing that hard work and being that vulnerable. So I think that would be a
Totally.
cool thing to talk about next time.
Definitely. And I think one thing we could wrap it up on is just talking about our current little challenge we're doing around communication, which
Yeah.
was your idea.
Yeah, you know,
So tell me about it.
um, I think it was after one of the card games, actually, now that I'm remembering, it may have been that specific card game. I'm just really competitive, y'all. I'm working on it. Just give me some grace. Um, but we had an opportunity of growth to realize that we needed to start over communicating to be able to understand what each other was feeling and thinking, and um, being able to use our voice more immediately in the moment instead of waiting. We started out with trying this. Let's just see if it continues to bother you for 120 seconds. If it continues to bother you for 2 minutes after it happens, then it needs to be talked about right then and there. We started with that, and what we ended up realizing is that we needed to just be over communicators, and so that's what we're doing right now is literally prioritizing over communicating, like saying way more than needs to be said or way more that's been said, maybe, just so we can really start to understand, okay, this particular body language or nonverbal communication for you is meaning this particular thing right now. And it just completely eliminates any sort of assumption or misunderstanding or even a missed opportunity for growth, because I think having that over communication style that we're trying out is really helping me to figure out my own self in those moments and also hearing what it is that you're needing at the same time.
And for me, as more of an introvert and someone who internally processes, but I also tend to like kind of numb and suppress my feelings, it's been really helpful to have that challenge. It's taking a lot of reminders because there's been a few times where you're like, hey, I'm over communicating. Like, remember the intention of this because I'm like, I feel
Right,
attacked, but
right.
it's helping me be able to recognize my emotions more in the moment because you'll feel off. Like you'll have a discussion and maybe just kind of be like, I'm a little irritated right now. Or like, there's something about the way that we're interacting across this room without words that is like not settling with me. And instead of being like, oh my gosh, this is just such a problem and I just can't believe this is happening again. And like, is this ever going to stop? And like, what's her problem? It's like, hey, what is it that I actually need? Like, what am I missing? And I realized how much I'm just a big softie and I really just need a lot of validation more than I thought. But it's also really cool because it's giving me a lot more opportunity to keep my feelings closer to the surface and address them more readily, which has been just an awesome, like, personal growth opportunity to be able to start to connect with what I'm feeling and what my intuition is telling me a little bit more readily.
That was good, Bean.
So this week, I would challenge you with your partner to maybe discuss like what are your goals, what are your priorities, what are your expectations for connection. If you haven't done like the love languages, that's a cool place to start. Another one that's not really for relationships, but I think it can be really enlightening is to do like an Enneagram to kind of learn a little
Yep.
bit about your partner. It's a fun little task to do together. You can take quizzes on it, and it gives you some insight into like your personality type and what kind of things you need and prioritize and in the other person as well. And then there's several sites that will show you like how to manage like relationships between those two types. So that could be like a really fun thing to do. And then maybe try out the challenge of over communication. And what that looks like is not living out of your emotions where you're like, if you're angry, you're just gonna go off. It's more like pause, and I like time out because it's like, let's take a second out from this situation currently. Because my big thing is I don't want to say something and then the rest of the evening be like awkward or uncomfortable because I brought up my feelings and now we're just gonna like sit here and be like kind of upset and like neither one of us really wants to connect because we don't feel no. I want it to be like, hey, time out, like separate us, like that movie Click. Like we're just gonna pause. We're gonna like sit here and have a conversation. Hey, real quick, this thing that just happened. Here's what I'm feeling. I think this is what I need. And then like, what did you see? And then you explain your side, and then we're like, okay, cool. So I need this, and you need this, and here's how we can meet each other. Awesome. Resume, and then get right back into your evening with a little bit more knowledge, and it stays more neutral versus like allowing those feelings to build up and then carry over and influence like every other interaction for the rest of the day.
That was a perfect explanation. It's really good.
Awesome. I'm excited. It makes me pumped to have more very open discussions with you that we can share.
Yeah, for sure.
So give that a shot, you guys. If you have any specific questions about your relationship, definitely either comment below or you can reach out to us individually, and we'll protect your info. But it is really helpful to kind of hear what struggles you have and what you've experienced in your relationship so we can talk more specifically about that. And next week, we will get into the next topic of boundaries, which I think, again, like you said, will be a great bridge from this one because there is that point where you start to over identify with your partner, and it's important to have healthy boundaries with that as well.
Right.
So, thank you guys so much for listening. Please remember to like, subscribe, comment if you're watching. And if you'd like to start your own podcast, you can use the link in the bio below for a discount off Buzzsprout, which is the platform that we use for our podcast. It's super easy to get started, and there is a code below. So, we will catch you guys next time on Time Under Tension.